What's up, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. I am so happy to be here. If you didn't notice, I took a week off. Your girl needed a bit of a reset. True crime 7 days a week can get a little bit emotionally draining and exhausting, so I decided to take a week off to spend time with my family. Thank you guys for being so awesome, patient, and I'm so thankful for all of you. And to make up for the fact that I took a week off, I am back today, not only with an insane solved case, but it's actually also a collaboration. So I'm sure you're wondering who I'm collabing with, and it is another true crime YouTuber named Joshua Miles, and he came up with this really awesome idea a couple months ago to kind of celebrate the true crime community because it has grown so much, and there's so many great true crime YouTubers out there with the right intentions, the right heart, the right morals, the right respect and storytelling abilities. Because the community's grown so large and we cover what we do, we all need to come together. So here we are today, and that's what's happening. So I know it's a very personal thing when you pick YouTubers that you watch, and this will kind of help you guys get a glimpse into Josh himself, because he is going to be telling a part of today's story in my video, and there's going to be a video up on his channel as well. It's about the Alaskan human hunter, and when I'm telling you it is bizarre and disturbing and wild, that doesn't even really cover it, but I will be telling a part of that story on his channel and his video. So you guys get two awesome videos today from myself and Josh, and honestly, it's going to be amazing. He is an incredible true crime content creator. He's always wanting to improve and do better and, do pretty much everything he possibly can. He's got a great group effort mentality, and I think that's so necessary when it comes to true crime. He's respectful. I can tell you right now and vouch for his research, because obviously I check everything out if I'm working with someone. It's a huge important point for me. He's just great, so definitely go over and check out his channel and the video I did with him, and also don't forget to subscribe. He has collaborated with an endless amount of other true crime YouTubers that you guys might like as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into today's video, which is a solved case on a young woman named Elisabeth Fritzl. This case has blown my mind, and I feel like it teaches a really great lesson. Elisabeth Fritzl was 18 years old when she went missing on August 28th, 1984 from Amstetten, I think I pronounced that right, Austria. Elisabeth lived with her parents, and again, pronunciation, I've heard it's Joseph. I've also heard it's Joseph. I think it's just kind of language barrier going on. I'm going to be calling him Joseph, but she lived with her parents, Joseph and Rosemary, and she had a huge family. She had 2 brothers, she had 4 sisters, and home life was chaotic, and not necessarily because there were so many children, but because it's actually believed her father started to abuse her at only 11 years old in 1977. Now, we're unsure if that's exactly when it started or if things happened prior. We're also kind of unsure if Joseph abused anyone else in the family, but from what we do know, it appears it was only Elisabeth. Now, she kept going through life despite living in very difficult and challenging conditions, and at the age of 15, she graduated from school and went on to take courses to become a waitress. She was trying to take these courses to become a waitress, to get a job, to get out of her home, to basically escape Joseph, but it became way too much before she was able to succeed, so she ended up running away in January of 1983. She ended up in Vienna with a friend that she met through these waitressing courses, but within 3 weeks, authorities found her after Joseph and Rosemary reported her as missing, and they brought her right back to her parents, no questions asked at all. Elisabeth ended up just giving in and going back to the waitressing course, and by mid-1984, she finished and she was immediately offered a job. So at this point, she believed things were looking up. She was going to be moving away, I'm pretty sure to a different town to work, and she would no longer have to deal with Joseph. But unfortunately, on August 28th, 1984, I believe it was just a few months after she turned 18, This opportunity was taken away from her when her father ended up luring her to the basement of their home. He would draw up plans for machines that he was selling through his job, and he would also renovate a lot of things down in the basement, so no one in the family really questioned it when he walked up to Elisabeth and asked her to carry a door down with him, a big heavy door. And obviously she has no reason to question it either. But she had absolutely no idea while she was doing this that she was actually helping to carry the door that would seal her in the basement for 24 years. Elisabeth held the door in place on its hinges while Joseph proceeded to secure it into place, and as soon as the job was done, Joseph unexpectedly shoved Elisabeth into the room and held an ether-soaked towel over her face until she eventually went unconscious. Now, nobody else in the home, I'm assuming and also hoping, saw Elisabeth go down to the basement with Joseph, because for the rest of the day, nobody seemed to question why she never came up. So this is leading me to believe that no one even knew she was down there. And I'm sure because of his plans, he made sure it was that way. All the family knew is that by the end of the day, they were unable to find her, and Rosemary went into a panic and immediately reported her as missing. But the problem is that Elisabeth had already run away once before when she went off with her friend to Vienna. So everyone was kind of under this assumption from the get-go that Elisabeth had just run away again, and she would likely either come back or be found. And you better believe that Joseph was making sure this theory sunk in. He began to pull these wild stories up out of nowhere about how Elisabeth had spoken to him multiple times about joining a religious cult. She apparently had complained to him multiple times about living in the home and that she wanted to be free. Now, Rosemary believed it was possible that she maybe ran away, but she had never heard of any of these other ideas before, any of these things that Elisabeth had mentioned. But Joseph was really playing the part, and he was convincing everyone she just ran away. This idea was solidified only a month after Elisabeth disappeared, because Joseph received this strange letter in the mail from Elisabeth, and he handed it over to police. The letter was sent from a place called, I believe it's pronounced Brana, and Elisabeth basically stated in this letter that she was sick and tired of her family. They weren't making her happy, so she left, she ran away, and she was staying with a friend. She also threatened that if anyone would continue to look for her, she would flee the country.
This was the proof Joseph needed to throw everybody off of the search for Elisabeth. He knew it would only be a matter of months before everything would start to quieten down, and that meant that keeping Elisabeth captive would become far easier. So he was really trying to play a bit of a waiting game so that he can keep Elisabeth captive and, his sinister plans can unfold. This was the first of many letters that Joseph forced Elisabeth to write to keep everybody's questions at bay. Life in the family home went on as normal for everybody except for Elisabeth, who was trapped just a few feet below her entire family. Now, Joseph often worked a lot in the basement, so his frequent trips to go down into the basement didn't raise any alarms or red flags for the family, anyone else in the house. It didn't really suggest anything was the matter or that anything untoward was taking place. Joseph would actually visit Elisabeth almost every single day that he held her captive, but on some occasions during some weeks he would only visit her maybe 3 times a week at minimum. Sometimes he would even stay the night with her down in the dark basement. Now, Joseph would bring Elisabeth just the right amount of food and supplies that she needed to survive, but he wouldn't bring much. He didn't bring any spares or extras for her.
The first 2 years that Elisabeth was down in the basement, Joseph basically only brought her bare minimum supplies such as food and water, and he only did this. So he didn't spend time with her. She essentially sat in the dark by herself for 2 years. But as soon as those 2 years were over, he changed things up a bit. His new main reason for coming down was to sexually assault Elisabeth, and it didn't take long at all for Elisabeth to become pregnant. And this is only one of multiple pregnancies that she would go through while in captivity. Her first pregnancy did not end well. At 10 weeks, she ended up suffering a miscarriage, and this is something that she had to go through all on her own at the age of 20. 2 years later, she became pregnant again, and in August of 1988, she gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl named Kirsten. Another 2 years after that, she fell pregnant again and gave birth to her first son that she named Stefan. So now, not only was Elisabeth this prisoner of Joseph's in this basement, but she had 2 children with her that had become imprisoned as well. And that is all they knew. They thought this was normal. They thought living in a basement and never going outside was normal. Could you even imagine growing up with that kind of mindset? Elisabeth tried to parent them as best as she possibly could, and she tried to give them any sort of life that she could. Despite all of these challenges going against her, she tried to give them a basic education. She tried to get them to play and teach them games the way that typical children would if they were not locked in a basement. But the dynamics kept on changing because these sexual assaults kept on occurring, and Elisabeth went on to have 5 more children. One of these children unfortunately passed away just days after birth because of a breathing condition that unfortunately Joseph refused to let the child be treated for, because after all, that would blow his cover and he didn't want that. So instead, he let his own child die. But there were still 6 children total, and this was creating a huge space issue. Kirsten and Stefan were told that they were to stay in the basement with their mother. There needed to be 1 more child that stayed in the basement, but 3 of the children had to go. Joseph, however, knew they couldn't just go anywhere, so he staged very elaborate ways for these children to be stumbled upon by Rosemary, of all people. One at a time, the babies were swaddled. I'm assuming after 3, any child after that was just immediately swaddled and taken up. But the babies were swaddled and they were placed in random places around the Fritzl home. So they would be placed in a bush, or they would be placed in the middle of the yard, or they'd be placed on the stairs. And each one of these babies would have a note attached to them written by who other than Elisabeth. Elisabeth would state that she couldn't take care of these children. She had run off, she had, become pregnant, and she was unable to care for the children, so she needed someone that she could trust to take care of them. And she would say in these letters, I know, I can trust my parents to do this. So Rosemary would basically just see this as her child that she's missed and not seen for years as begging for help. And as a mother, she couldn't deny that. She missed her daughter so much and she wanted to be a part of her life, and this was basically her only way of doing it. So she didn't question it, and she would take these babies in, and these children lived upstairs.
Rosemary, however, actually went to social services about the kids, and shockingly, social services actually granted them guardianship of these kids, despite the fact that they hadn't received consent from Elisabeth herself. But technically, Joseph and Rosemary were the grandparents, so it didn't really raise any alarms and no questions were really asked. But even with 3 of the kids out of the basement, there still wasn't enough room down in the basement for the rapidly growing number of children. Now, Joseph decided that for his sinister and really twisted plans to continue, for his twisted desires to continue, he would need to figure out a way to expand this basement. And unsurprisingly, Joseph wasn't about to expand this basement himself. So he made the 3 kids and the mother spend 3 years digging out the basement to make a big enough space for them to live in. 3 years hand digging a space that they all so desperately needed.
The space they created was actually pretty intricate, and I will be posting pictures where you can see the layout of everything. There was a living room, a bathroom, and 2 bedrooms total by the end of this, and they dug out majority of this on their own. I don't think there was maybe more than 2 total rooms at the beginning of this, if even. There is no telling how long Joseph would have kept Elisabeth and all of their children captive, because he just kept on adding space. He wasn't worried about space. He wanted to make them comfortable, and it seems like he was really in it for the long haul. But then something finally happened that allowed them to be free and completely ruined his plans. Kirsten fell incredibly sick in 2008, and at this point, Kirsten is 19 years old. Kirsten was older than her mom was when she was locked in the basement by her own father. She had been sick for an incredibly long time, and she was showing absolutely no signs of progress, and she was actually just getting worse and worse, and Elisabeth was worried if she didn't seek medical attention, she was going to die. And she had already had one baby die from Joseph not allowing them to get treatment, so she really begged Joseph to let Kirsten go to the hospital. At first, he was very reluctant. He didn't want his cover blown, but then he finally, for some odd reason, agreed, but he had to come up with a plan. So basically, he called an ambulance and sent Kirsten to the hospital that way, but obviously she had many rules she had to follow, and he also sent her with a note from her mom explaining what exactly was wrong with her.
But Joseph didn't think about the fact that Kirsten was as white as a piece of paper and was thin as could be. It was immediately clear to the doctors that something not quite right was going on here, so Kirsten actually spent the next week being interviewed and questioned by the local police force. Kirsten refused to reveal any information about herself and her living conditions or anything like that to the police, and that was due to the fact that she had lived her entire life out of fear of Joseph and being controlled by Joseph. So authorities decided to make a public appeal to see if the public had any information as to who Kirsten's parents were, and hopefully someone would come forward with any information that could aid their investigations. But obviously nobody came forward with any information because nobody had seen Kirsten before. Nobody knew who her parents were because Kirsten had spent her entire life in the basement. Authorities were eventually starting to put pieces together and decided to reopen Elisabeth's case. And they reopened Elisabeth's case on the sole account of how sketchy and kind of shady Joseph was acting.
They quickly realized that Joseph seemed to conveniently and continuously be receiving notes from people that just didn't make sense. He received multiple letters from Elisabeth stating the same things over and over again about how she wanted to stay away from them. She was with a friend to not come and look for her, but she would say to not come and look for her, and then she'd send more letters. And it would always pop up at very convenient times. He had also received these notes from Elisabeth from these babies that just happened to pop up all over their front yard. And also this young woman had shown up to the hospital sick, unwell, not knowing who her mother is apparently. And there was also a note on her, and she was connected to Joseph because he's the one that called the ambulance. So they noticed basically there were inconsistencies. Something was happening here. They really started to put pressure on Joseph, and they weren't the only ones. Elisabeth was putting pressure on Joseph as well. She could watch the news. She had a television down in the basement, and she saw how many people were trying to figure out who this young mysterious woman's mother was. So she figured, the best way to get out of the situation was for her to just show up and claim Kirsten as her child, not go into detail, and they would go on as normal. It took a lot of convincing, but after finally telling Joseph she would not mention him whatsoever or the basement, he allowed her to go out. This is probably the first time she had been out in 24 years. But again, as before, hospital staff realized right away something was not right, because just like her daughter, Elisabeth was pale, she was very, very thin, she was very, very jumpy, and she looked very, very out of place, and she conveniently popped up again at just the right time, which is what happened with all the letters And basically, you get the gist of what's going on. So on April 26, 2008, when she showed up to the hospital, the doctors called authorities and Elisabeth was taken into custody. They started to question Elisabeth at first about Kirsten. They asked her why she was so sick, why she was so thin, why she was so pale, why she had basically no skills socially. And eventually they started to question her about Joseph. So authorities were piecing the puzzle together. Now, I'm not sure at this point if they knew that this was Elisabeth. I am assuming they guessed it was. But either way, Elisabeth finally promised to tell them everything if they promised her she would never ever have to see her father again. And at this point, the truth came out and everybody was in complete shock.
Joseph was arrested that same night. Authorities went down into the basement of the home to release and retrieve and save the 3 children that still remained down there. And surprisingly, Rosemary actually fled the house when this happened. Now, to the police, this made it seem like Rosemary knew something or was somehow involved in the captivity of these human beings. But once Joseph was questioned and after Rosemary was found and interviewed, it became immediately clear that she had absolutely no idea about what was going on, just beneath her feet. She was in a complete state of shock and horror that her own daughter was beneath her feet the entire time. On top of that massive shock, her own husband had been lying to her repeatedly for years. Now, interestingly to note, there had actually been tenants that were living in the first floor flat of the family home. And the family actually rented out this flat for a bit of income, and when those tenants were interviewed by the police, they revealed that they had absolutely no idea that anybody was in the basement either. They had no inclination as to the fact that somebody was down there. Now, I know what you're thinking. If there'd been people down in the basement for all that time, how had nobody heard any noises? Now, there had actually been a lot of strange noises coming from the basement, but Joseph had used his manipulation skills to be able to explain away any of the strange noises, probably blaming rodents or animals or things like that. He'd always managed to provide a plausible and reasonable explanation for all the strange sounds and noises that came from the basement.
Antwort auf die Frage nach dem Warum?
Joseph Fritzl doesn't want the world to see his face. What he did for 24 years in the cellar of the family home is all too well known. It was a bizarre spectacle as he was led into the dock.
Haben Sie eine Erklärung nach dem Warum?
The people are asking if there's an explanation for why you did it, says the reporter. Fritzl remains silent. This is the first attempt at understanding how a man could keep his daughter locked up underground and father 7 children with her. The court's hearing Elisabeth Fritzl's story through videoed interviews, 11 hours of tape deemed so harrowing, the jury will watch it in small chunks.
In the case of Joseph Fritzl, the prosecutor of Amstetten accuses him of committing the following crimes: murder, enslavement, false imprisonment, coercion, rape and incest.
Fritzl admits rape, imprisonment and incest, but denies the murder of one of those 7 children by his failure to care for it. While 3 of the children, Lisa, Alexander and Monica, were allowed to live a normal life upstairs, Elisabeth and 3 others were kept a prisoner down here, a complex of small, windowless rooms. The jury was asked to smell items from this world to give them an idea of conditions.
Joseph was sentenced to life in prison for multiple counts of kidnapping, sexual assault, murder, and the list just goes on. And Elisabeth was able to be taken to a different town. This town has not been named whatsoever. She lives there completely under a new identity. She's also under total protection. She has guards surrounding her entire property. There is constant CCTV running. This case was so massively publicized because this young woman had been captured by her own father and had been living just feet underneath of the entire family for 24 years. Everyone had been so convinced by Elisabeth's letters that she had ran away and she was fine and, she just had these babies and she needed help. No one even stopped for a second to question that really and wonder if something else could have been going on, if something else was happening behind the scenes that they were missing. And she just wanted to live the rest of her life as peacefully as she could after going through the traumatic 24 years that she did. Isn't even a picture of her that has been taken and released to the public in order to protect her identity. The last picture we have of her, I think, was even like 2 years before she was put into the basement. Elisabeth spent 24 years being held as a prisoner by her own father, just feet away from the rest of her family that she loved so much, that she missed so much, that had no idea she was down there. She knew all of them were above her on their birthdays, growing up, different things they went through. You know, these siblings of hers went from children to adults feet from her, but she didn't know what they looked like. She didn't know what they were doing. That is a torture just in itself. Her children that she was forced to bring into this world were put in the exact same situation she was. Imagine having to explain to 3 of your children that the other 3 get to be free, but they don't because they were born first. This story to me really puts it into perspective why exactly it is so important to go above and beyond when it comes to searches and questioning runaway claims and every single missing persons case. There are so many cases I have covered alone on this channel where there has been evidence that this person has, run away. There has been a letter left behind. There has been signs left behind. And authorities take that and they run with it, and there is no longer an investigation. It's so easy to see, oh, well, there was a letter sent, and obviously this person was wanting to run away, or obviously they were depressed, or obviously they were unhappy, so there we go, that's the answer. This goes to show that you never, ever, ever truly know what is behind something like that. You don't know what that person was going through while they were writing the letter. The letter can say one thing and there can be something completely different going on behind it. At this point, I think we all understand how dangerous it is to assume runaway based off of very basic information or even information like we saw in today's video. This is probably why I cover so many cases where the largest theory is that the person is a runaway. Because these are the cases that get tossed to the side, where assumptions are made, where the public makes their mind up on something that honestly isn't even relevant to their life. They make a decision for someone who could be out in a basement somewhere for 24 years. It makes me think back to every case that I've covered like this, where there is this proof, there is this evidence, the person claims they are okay, and they claim they ran off on their own. And all I picture now is them being locked up somewhere, and no one's searching for them anymore because they've made their mind up. That's all I have for you guys today. Let me know what you guys think about this down below. We've been having a ton of great conversations in the comment section lately. I feel like Christian Andriacchio's video kind of like triggered these great discussions and really thinking from every single angle. Don't forget to follow the link down below to go and check out Josh's video where him and I speak about the Alaskan human hunter. Again, one of the craziest stories I think I have ever heard, hands down. Don't forget to also subscribe to his channel and check out the other collaborations he's done with other true crime YouTubers. And while you're at it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to become a part of the Hallan fam so that we can hopefully bring them home together. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.